The room was not quiet exactly, more like the kind of still that settles over a crowd when the number on the screen is larger than anyone expected. Marcus Webb stood at the front of the Cimarron County Extension's pavilion on a Tuesday morning in September of 2023, his pointer resting against a bar graph, and he let the room stay that way for a moment before he said anything. The pavilion smelled of old coffee and the dry grass heat of an Oklahoma September morning, and the folding chairs were set in rows on a concrete floor that had absorbed 30 years of boot traffic and spilled fertilizer program arguments. The graph showed two readings from the same 480-acre parcel in the western Oklahoma Panhandle. The left bar represented 2002. The right bar represented 2023. The left bar read 1.1% organic matter. The right bar read 3.4%. Marcus cleared his throat and said in a voice that carried the specific weight of a man revising a position he had held for 19 years. The results from this operation are not consistent with what I told this producer in 2004. A man in the third row did not move. He was wearing a canvas work jacket over a faded chambray shirt, and his hands were the color of the ground outside, and he did not look at Marcus Webb when Marcus said it. He looked at the screen. His name was Ray Jennings, and he had been farming that same parcel since 2002, and he had not purchased a commercial fertilizer bag in 6 years. And the soil beneath his dryland wheat was, by the numbers on the screen, among the healthiest in the county. He said nothing. Let me tell you how a man gets to that kind of quiet. Earl Jennings died in February of 2002 on a Thursday in the kitchen of the same house where he had been born, which was a thing that happened less often by then than it used to. He left Ray the farmhouse, the equipment, and 480 acres of Cimarron County ground that a county appraiser described in the estate paperwork as moderately depleted dryland cropland with limited yield history. The appraiser put it at $620 an acre. Ray did not dispute the number. He thought the appraiser was probably right about the appearance of the ground, even if he suspected there was something else underneath the appearance. He found the soil journal in the bottom drawer of Earl's desk under a farmer's almanac from 1987 and a rolled-up plat map. The drawer was stiff from the cold and from years of not being opened in front of anyone. And when Ray got it open, the almanac's spine was split down the middle, and the cover had gone brown at the corners. It was a spiral notebook, 70 pages, Earl's handwriting filling about half of them, a blocky, unhurried print that pressed hard enough into the paper that you could feel the letters on the reverse side if you ran your thumb across. Earl had started keeping it in 1974 when he had attended a no-till demonstration at a grain elevator in Liberal, Kansas, and had come home convinced that the plow was doing more damage than the drought. The journal was not scientific exactly. It recorded cover crop species, seeding rates, bloom dates, decomposition notes from the following spring. It recorded soil color changes Earl had noticed over time. It recorded a single underlined sentence that Earl had apparently copied from a pamphlet at the demonstration. A legume cover will fix between 80 and 120 pounds of nitrogen per acre per season at no purchase cost. Ray read the journal twice before he put it back. He set it on the kitchen shelf above the window where it would stay for the next 21 years. He drove to Amarillo in the spring of 2003 to attend a soil health workshop put on by a group of dry land farmers and a soil microbiologist from Panhandle State. The meeting was held in a conference room on the second floor of a motor inn off A40 with drop-ceiling tiles and a projector screen that wouldn't quite stay flat at the bottom left corner. And Ray sat in a folding chair for 2 days and listened to men who had been doing what Earl's journal described, but with the vocabulary Earl had lacked. They used words like mycorrhizal fungal networks and aggregate stability and nitrogen cycling. But underneath the vocabulary, the idea was the same idea Earl had underlined in 1974. You stop disturbing the soil. You cover it. You let the biology work. The nitrogen comes from the air, through the legumes, and then through the residue, and then into the grain. He drove home and told Delia what he had heard. Delia Jennings kept the household accounts in a green spiral notebook of her own, a separate one from Earl's soil journal, and she listened to Ray across the kitchen table, and then she said, "All right, what does it cost to try it?" Ray worked out the numbers on a yellow legal pad. He had been spending roughly $32 an acre on synthetic nitrogen and phosphorus each year across 480 acres. That was $15,360 per year in fertilizer inputs, not counting herbicide, not counting fuel for tillage passes. He showed Delia the number. She took the pencil from behind her ear and wrote it in her notebook under the heading Current Input Costs. Then she wrote a 0 underneath it and labeled it Target and underlined it and set the pencil flat on the table. And that was that. The trouble was that the ground in 2003 did not look like it would support that ambition. It was thin, compacted in the upper 6 inches from years of conventional tillage, and the organic matter at 1.1% was about half what the workshop microbiologist had described as the biological minimum for a functioning nitrogen cycle. You could not simply stop buying fertilizer and expect the soil to produce it. You had to build the biology first, and building the biology took years, and in the meantime you still had a wheat crop to put in. Ray did not stop buying fertilizer in 2003. He reduced it, buying inputs by category, replacing what the cover crop biology could not yet supply, and reducing what it could. He planted a winter rye and hairy vetch mix behind the wheat harvest in the summer of 2003. The vetch was the legume component, and it fixed nitrogen through the fall and into the spring, and when Ray terminated it ahead of wheat planting in 2004, the terminated biomass began cycling into the soil. It was not dramatic. It was not something you could see from the county road. It looked, from the county road, like a field that had not been cleaned up properly. Marcus Webb saw it from the county road in the summer of 2004. He was the Cimarron County Extension soil scientist, 34 years old at the time, recently placed after completing his master's degree at Oklahoma State. And he was doing his circuit of the county in a white university pickup when he pulled over and looked at Ray's field and decided to stop in. Ray was in the yard when Marcus drove up, adjusting the coulters on his no-till drill. The drill was parked along the south side of the machine shed, and Ray had the toolbox open on the fender, a torque wrench and 2 flat-bladed screwdrivers laid out on a shop rag beside the wheel. Marcus stepped out of the truck in a pressed short-sleeve shirt and boots that were still clean at the welt, introduced himself, shook Ray's hand, and asked if he could walk the field. Ray said yes. They walked out together into the standing cover mix, which was knee-high in places and patchy in others, the hairy vetch threading through the rye stalks in green ropes, the soil surface beneath it dark with residue, not much to look at in the conventional sense. The air above the cover was heavier than the yard, damper, carrying a green vegetable smell that a tilled field would not have had. Marcus pulled a soil probe from his back pocket and pushed it into the top 6 inches. He turned the core over in his palm and looked at it for a moment, a compact cylinder of pale, close-grained topsoil, and set it on the lip of the probe. He was not trying to be unkind. He was operating in complete good faith inside the education he had received, which had taught him that soil health was a function of inputs managed correctly, and that a field producing this kind of visual disorder was probably a field being managed incorrectly. "Mr. Jennings," he said, "I appreciate that you attended the Amarillo workshop, but this ground is operating below its biological potential. At 1% organic matter, you don't have the microbial biomass to cycle nutrients without supplementation. You're going to fall short on your nitrogen budget this coming season without synthetic support." Ray looked at the probe in Marcus's hand. He said, "Earl's journal says different." Marcus nodded in a way that was polite and did not commit to anything, and he handed Ray a printed fact sheet about balanced fertility management on dryland wheat in western Oklahoma, and he drove away. Ray read the fact sheet that evening. He set it face down on the table when he was done. The Cimarron County Fair ran in late August of 2004, and Marcus Webb was on the fair grandstand panel for the Saturday morning agricultural session. The grandstand benches faced east, and the August sun was already full on the crowd by 9 o'clock. The metal folding chairs on the stage platform, throwing short shadows across the boards. Ray was in the third row with his daughter Gail, who was 12 years old that summer and had dirt in the creases of her knuckles from having helped him terminate the cover crop that week. One of the other panelists asked Marcus about alternative fertility programs he had seen in the county, and Marcus said, "There's a producer out west of town trying to live off cover crop nitrogen on ground that doesn't have the organic matter to support it. I think he means well, but the soil data doesn't justify the approach. You can't farm out ground and then expect it to feed itself." A few people in the audience turned to look in Ray's direction. Ray did not look back at them. He looked at his hands, which were in his lap, and then he looked at Gail beside him. And Gail was looking at Marcus Webb with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite understanding, the way a 12-year-old looks when an adult has said something wrong about her family in a public place. Ray put his hand on her shoulder and said, "Write it down." Gail did not have anything to write on. She did not need to. She remembered the word that Marcus had used, farmed out. She would remember it for 19 years. Here is what Carl Pryor was doing in 2004, because the story requires him. Carl farmed 1,200 acres that year in the same county, good ground east of Ray's place, heavier soil with a little more natural organic matter, and better rainfall odds. Carl was a good farmer in the conventional sense. He understood agronomy, kept his equipment maintained, and hit his planting windows consistently. He had financed an expansion that year, adding another 400 acres under a short-term operating note at 6.25% from a Guymon bank, and he was buying his fertility inputs from the same co-op supplier Ray had used before the cover crop program. Carl's input spend that year was $44 per acre across 1,600 acres, which came to $70,400 in fertilizer and chemical costs alone before seed, fuel, or equipment payments. Carl was not reckless. He was optimistic in a way that the market in 2004 rewarded, and he was building his operation the way his father had built it, and the way the bank and the extension office agreed was the right way to build it. He was also, in 2004, telling anyone at the co-op counter who asked that Ray Jennings had gone peculiar since Earl died, which was not said unkindly exactly, but was not said in Ray's favor either. If you are enjoying this story, take a second and leave a comment below. These stories take time to build, and hearing from you is part of what makes it worth building right. Ray spent the years between 2005 and 2010 in a kind of patient invisibility. His cover crop mixes evolved. He was adding crimson clover to the vetch and rye mix by 2006, and he was reading the nitrogen credits from the terminated biomass against his soil tests each spring, watching the numbers move, slowly, not dramatically, not fast enough for anyone watching from the road to notice. In 2005, his soil organic matter tested at 1.2%. In 2007, it tested at 1.5%. In 2009, it tested at 1.9%. The numbers were climbing, but slowly enough that they required faith to read. You had to believe the direction mattered more than the speed. Delia's notebook was filling up across those years with a different kind of number. She tracked the input costs Ray was spending each season in the left column, and the input costs he would have spent under the old program in the right column, and she calculated the difference and carried it forward. In 2005, the difference was $6,200. In 2006, it was $7,800. By 2009, the cumulative difference between what Ray had spent and what he would have spent had grown to $38,000. And Delia had that number underlined twice in the notebook, and she had written beside it, in her own handwriting, in ink, in the ground. What she meant was that the savings had not gone into a separate account. They had stayed in the operation, in the form of soil biology Ray was slowly rebuilding, in the form of reduced fuel costs from eliminating tillage passes, in the form of reduced compaction that was improving the water infiltration rate on a parcel of ground that received only 15 inches of rain in a good year. The co-op ran a customer appreciation breakfast in October of 2009. The co-op manager was Dale Hutchins, who had known Ray's father and who ran a clean, well-organized operation that served most of the county's conventional farmers. Ray went to the breakfast because Dale asked him, and because he still bought herbicide from the co-op, even if he no longer bought fertilizer, and because being a neighbor required showing up even when you were not sure of your welcome. The hall smelled of scrambled eggs and the particular sweetness of commercial coffee kept on a burner too long, and the paper plates were stacked on a folding table beside a foil pan of sausage links that had gone a little gray on one side. Marcus Webb was there. He was talking with Carl near the coffee urns when Ray came in, and Marcus looked up and said, in a voice that was carrying across the room, "Ray Jennings, still farming on faith over there?" Carl laughed. Not unkindly. It was the kind of laugh that fills a pause. Ray poured himself a cup of coffee. He said, "Organic matters at 1.9. Marcus said, "You need it above 3 for the nitrogen cycle to carry you. You've got a ways to go." Ray drank the coffee. He did not say that he knew that. He did not say that 1.9 was not where he was going. It was where he was. He set the cup down and walked back out to his pickup and drove home on the county road. Gail was 17 that fall. She had started riding with Ray on the planting passes, sitting in the cab and watching the drill monitor, calling out the seed rate by zone the way Delia had taught her to read the notebook columns. The cab smelled of diesel and the fine cornstarch dust of seed treatment. And on the passes that ran past dark, the drill monitor's amber numbers lit the lower half of the windshield from inside. She asked Ray on the way home from the co-op that evening what Marcus had said to him, and Ray told her. "What does 3% get you?" she asked. "Enough biology to fix your nitrogen without buying it," Ray said. Gail thought about that for a moment. "How long?" "At this rate," Ray said, "in another 10 years. She looked out the window at the fields going by in the October dark. She said, "That's a long time." Ray said, It's the same amount of time either way. He bought his last bag of commercial fertilizer in the spring of 2011. The bag was a 20-pound sample of phosphorus starter, which he used as a seed treatment on the wheat planting that fall. And when he had used it up, he did not order another. His soil test that spring had put organic matter at 2.3%, and the phosphorus cycling from the residue was measurable and consistent. He did not announce the decision. Delia recorded the last fertilizer purchase in her notebook on a Tuesday in March, circled it, and wrote next to it, in her small, level hand, "Last one." Now let me tell you what Carl Pryor's ledger looked like in 2011, because the comparison requires honesty on both sides. Carl was farming 1,800 acres by then. Having added another 200 acres on a cash lease in 2010, his input program had scaled with his acreage, and his fertilizer spend that year was pushing $89,000. He was hitting yields that justified the spend, averaging 48 bushels per acre on winter wheat in a decent rainfall year, and the market price was supporting his margins. On the surface, in 2011, Carl's operation looked like the right operation to be running. The trouble with input-intensive operations in dry country wheat farming is not that they fail in good years. They perform fine in good years. The trouble is what happens when two bad things arrive at the same time. The two things arrived together in 2019. Input costs had been climbing since 2012, partly following commodity prices and partly following the global price of natural gas, which is the feedstock for synthetic nitrogen production. Ray had been watching the nitrogen price reports in the farm press for years, the way you watch a creek level in spring, not expecting a flood exactly, but keeping track. The reports came in a thin weekly newsletter he kept on the corner of the kitchen table, folded in quarters, the price column circled in pencil where a number had moved more than 2 points. By 2018, the cost of anhydrous ammonia had roughly doubled from its 2011 level. Carl was spending close to $47 per acre on fertility inputs alone, across 1,800 acres, which put his annual fertilizer bill at nearly $84,600. Then the summer of 2019 arrived without rain. The Panhandle had seen dry stretches before, and Carl had weathered them. But this one came on top of an already compressed margin, and it came in the year when the anhydrous price spiked again in July, moving up 22% in 6 weeks behind a pipeline maintenance shutdown in the southern corridor. Carl had already committed to his inputs before the spike. He had applied his nitrogen in the fall of 2018 at the old price, and the drought came for his wheat in the spring of 2019 and took the yield anyway. And when the crop came off in June, it averaged 21 bushels per acre, less than half his normal yield, against an input cost that had not dropped at all. Carl sat in his truck at the field edge for a long time after the last load came off. The cab was hot from sitting in the direct sun, the door window down, his arm resting on the frame, and he was looking at the cut field, which was short stubble and pale, the color of ground that had given what little it had. Ray heard about it from Delia, who had heard it from Carl's wife, Linda, who had called on a Wednesday evening and talked for an hour. Delia was at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around her coffee cup when she told Ray what Linda had said, and she did not editorialize, and she did not say, "I told you," and neither did Ray. Ray's 2019 crop was not good either. Drought does not discriminate. His yield came in at 24 bushels per acre, 3 bushels better than Carl's, which, in a tight year, is a meaningful difference, but not a dramatic one. The difference was on the cost side. Ray's input costs in 2019 were approximately $4.60 per acre, covering seed treatment and herbicide. He had no fertilizer bill. His cash position at the end of that season, after operating expenses and the land payment on the final note he was carrying, was positive by $11,000. Carl's position at the end of 2019 was not something Carl talked about directly, but the Gaimon Bank's production loan review that November produced a correction in Carl's operating line that required him to liquidate something. The question for the next 2 years was what? Carl sold equipment first. A grain cart he had bought in 2017 on a 5-year note went to a dealer in Liberal in the spring of 2020, loaded onto a flatbed on a gray March morning. A pickup went back to the Ford dealer in Gaimon in the fall of that year. By the spring of 2021, the bank had made clear that the operating structure was not sustainable at 1,800 acres, and Carl began the process of deciding which ground to let go. He sold 640 acres in July of 2021, distressed ground by the pricing standards of a better year, handled through a Gaimon real estate broker who processed the transaction quietly. The 640 acres came to market in 2 parcels, and Ray heard about it the same week the sign went up from Dale Hutchins at the co-op counter. Ray bought a quart of herbicide and drove out of the co-op lot and turned west instead of north toward Carl's ground, and drove by both parcels slowly with his window down. The July air smelled of hot caliche and cut wheat stubble, and the ground on Carl's parcels looked tired in the way that ground looks when it has been asked for more than it had to give. The surface pale and crusted in long stretches, a color different from Ray's ground across the road. He read both broker signs and drove home. He had been watching his own soil test climb and had been carrying the numbers in his head for months. His organic matter had tested at 3.1% that spring, which was close enough to 3.4 that he knew he was near the end of the building phase and near the beginning of something else. He also had $67,000 in a savings account in Gaimon that Delia had been moving money into since 2006, the cumulative difference between his actual input costs and what his input costs would have been under the conventional program. That $67,000 was not earmarked for anything in particular. It was earmarked for the right opportunity. He made an offer on 160 acres of the 640, the quarter section closest to his home place, through the same broker. He paid cash. The transaction closed in September of 2021, and Ray's total acreage became 640 acres, exactly doubling the inherited base from 2002. He did not call Carl. He did not attend the closing with any ceremony. He drove home and told Delia. And Delia opened her notebook and wrote in it for a moment and then closed it and made coffee. Carl kept 1,160 acres. He restructured his operating note, reduced his input program to a split application strategy that cut his per-acre fertilizer cost by roughly 18%. And he was still farming in 2023, and he was making it work, and that is the honest end of the Carl Pryor story. He was not ruined. He was corrected by arithmetic. Marcus Webb spent the spring of 2023 preparing the Cimarron County Soil Health Field Day presentation at a metal desk in his county extension office, a narrow room at the fairgrounds with a single window that looked out onto the empty livestock pens. He had taped a county plat map to the wall behind the desk and marked in red the parcels he had been tracking for his 20-year summary. One of the data sets had stopped him. The 20-year trajectory on the Jennings parcel showed organic matter moving from 1.1 to 3.4%, which was a rate of improvement that fell exactly within the documented range for successfully implemented no-till and perennial cover cropping systems in semi-arid plain soils, but which Marcus had not seen achieved on dryland wheat ground in his career. He pulled the extension file from 2004, which he had kept, a manila folder with a handwritten label across the tab, the paper gone pale at the edges. He read his own field notes. He read the sentence he had written in his field notebook in the summer of that year: soil organic matter insufficient for biological nitrogen cycling. Recommend supplemental synthetic nitrogen program. He sat with that sentence for a while. He called Ray in June of 2023. Ray answered on the fourth ring from the machine shed where he had been replacing a bearing on the drill's coulter assembly. He had the phone propped on the fender of the drill, and he wiped his hands on a shop rag and held it while Marcus talked. Marcus said he was preparing the field day presentation and asked if Ray would consent to having his soil data presented publicly as a case study. Ray said that was fine. Marcus asked if he would be willing to attend the field day. Ray said he supposed he would. Marcus asked, "Is there anything you'd want said about the approach?" Ray thought for a moment, the shop rag folded once in his hand. "No." Marcus said, "No. All right. I'll let the data say it." The field day was September 12th, 2023, a Tuesday, in the Extension Pavilion at the fairgrounds. 61 producers attended, plus 4 extension agents, 2 Panhandle state agronomists, and a reporter from the Boise City News who was writing a feature on soil health in the Panhandle. Gail drove up from Guyman, where she had been working for 3 years at an agricultural consulting firm, and she sat in the second row with her notebook open on her knee, the date and the session title already written across the top of the first page. Marcus presented the data at 10:45 in the morning. He had organized the presentation in a straightforward sequence: county-wide average organic matter in 2002, county-wide average organic matter in 2023, and then the individual producer outcomes. He showed the bar graph with the 2 readings from Ray's parcel last. He let the room look at it for a long moment before he spoke. 3.4%, he said. 20 years, no synthetic nitrogen for the last 6. Consistent cover crop termination and no-till management. The nitrogen budget on this parcel is running on fixed atmospheric nitrogen and residue cycling. The soil tests show adequate available nitrogen at planting across the last 3 seasons without commercial input. He paused and looked at his notes and then looked up again. I told this producer in 2004 that his ground couldn't support this approach. I was working from the soil data available at the time, and I was operating from an assumption that the building timeline was prohibitive. The 20-year data says the timeline was correct, and the approach was correct. I was wrong about what the ground could do. The room held that for a moment the way rooms do when the weight of something adjusts. 2 or 3 people in the back turned to look at Ray. One of the Panhandle State agronomists had stopped writing and was looking at the bar graph with her pen held still above the open binder in her lap. A man in the 5th row, who Ray recognized as a neighbor from the South County, leaned over and said something quiet to the woman beside him. Ray was wearing the same canvas jacket he had worn to the fair grandstand in 2004. He had not worn it specifically for the occasion. It was his jacket. He looked at the screen and at the bar graph and did not say anything, and he was not required to. Gail in the second row had her pen moving. She was writing the numbers, 1.1 and 3.4, and the 20 years between them. Marcus closed the session by taking questions, and the 2 agronomists asked detailed questions about the cover crop species mix and the nitrogen credit calculation methodology, and Marcus answered them accurately using data from Ray's soil tests and tissue samples across the last 5 growing seasons. At the end, as the room was starting to break up, chairs scraping back on the concrete floor, Marcus walked down to the third row and held out his hand to Ray. Ray stood and shook it. Marcus said, "I should have come back out to your place more than once." Ray said, "It's all right. The ground kept the record." Marcus nodded and looked at the floor for a moment and then back up. He said, "It did." That was the whole of the exchange. No ceremony, no audience watching, just two men at a folding chair in a county extension pavilion, one of whom had been wrong for 19 years and was now correct, and the other of whom had been waiting 19 years to not have to say anything about it. Gail found Ray near the door as the crowd was moving out. She said, "You didn't tell him about the journal?" Ray picked up his jacket from the back of a folding chair. "No reason to," he said. "He read the data." Gail looked back toward the front of the room where the bar graph was still up on the screen, the two bars standing in the emptying pavilion, while people filed past on either side. "Earl would have liked to see that," she said. Ray said, "He saw most of the work." After the field day, Gail drove to Ray's place for supper. Delia had made a pot of chicken and dumplings, which was the meal she made when something worth noting had happened, and the kitchen smelled of it when they came in from the porch, the steam coming off the pot in slow rolls, the dumplings pale and thick against the broth. The three of them sat at the kitchen table under the hanging lamp and ate. Ray did not talk much about the field day over supper. He talked about the wheat planting schedule and whether the cover crop seed mix needed adjusting for the coming season, because the rye had come in thinner than he wanted on the South 40 in 2022, and he was thinking about adding another pound per acre to the seeding rate. Gail made notes in her notebook, the same way Delia had made notes across the last 20 years, and the two notebooks sat side by side on the table edge while they ate. After supper, while Delia stood at the sink with the water running and a dish towel over her shoulder, Ray told Gail what he had been thinking about. He had been working out the numbers for 3 months, and the numbers were simple enough that he had not needed a legal pad. He told her he wanted to lease her the home quarter, the original 120 acres around the farmhouse, at a rate 60% below the county average cash rent. He told her he was attaching a first option to purchase the full home quarter at the 2021 assessed value, which was land he had inherited debt-free and could therefore price as he chose. Gail put her pen down. She said, "Dad." Ray said, "Your grandfather started the soil journal in 1974. The ground's ready. You should start learning what it does under your own management." Gail looked at Delia, who had turned off the water and was standing with the dish towel in her hands and looking at her notebook on the table, and not at either of them, which was Delia's way of saying she had already agreed to this and Gail could agree or ask questions, but the discussion had been concluded between the two of them some time ago. Gail said, "All right." She picked up her pen and wrote the lease rate and the option terms in the notebook while Ray talked through them. She drove home that night with the lease terms Ray had written out on a piece of paper and the cover crop seeding rate adjustment written in her own notebook beside it, and she thought about what it had cost Ray to build what he was giving her, and how long the building had taken, and how little of it had showed from the road while it was happening. In the weeks after the field day, the Boise City News article ran under a headline about Panhandle soil health, and the Panhandle State agronomists cited the Jennings parcel data in a summary they submitted to the Extension publication. And Marcus Webb gave 2 additional presentations in neighboring counties using the same 20-year data set. Ray's name was in the published summary because the data required it, and he did not attend the neighboring county presentations because they did not require him. He was planting cover crop that week. The 640 acres he now farmed was not a famous operation. It would not become one. It was a section of panhandle ground that had come to Earl Jennings tired and had been given 40 years to recover, the first 20 of them by instinct in a handwritten journal, and the last 20 of them by a man who had read the journal carefully enough to understand that instinct and biology were pointing in the same direction, and had been patient enough to wait out the distance between 1.1 and 3.4. Delia's notebook from 2003 through 2023 ran to 4 volumes, green spirals the same as the first one, and she kept them in the kitchen cabinet above the coffee maker. She did not keep them for any particular audience. They were a record because the operation required one, and because Delia Jennings was a person who understood that a ledger you could read in your own handwriting in the middle of the night was a more reliable document than one you had to call someone else to interpret. Patience, practiced long enough, stops feeling like patience and starts feeling like the way things work. Ray was up before light the morning after Gail drove home. He made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the cover, which was showing above the wheat stubble in the east field, the vetch runners already spreading in the short rows, the crimson clover seedlings catching the first gray light. The ground was dark with residue beneath the seedlings, the way it had been getting dark and darker over 20 years, the way a thing that is working looks when you are the only one watching it closely enough to see. He took his coffee out to the porch. The dog, a 4-year-old blue heeler named Cole, came around from the south side of the house and lay down at his boot. The air smelled like harvest residue and the faint mineral smell of the soil after the first frost, which had come 2 nights before and settled in over the flat ground and left the cover standing. He looked out at the 640 acres that had come to him in halves, first from Earl and then from Carl's overreach, and he thought about what the bar graph had looked like on the screen at the pavilion, 2 bars standing side by side 20 years apart, and how the distance between them was not really a distance at all once you understood what had filled it. Earl's soil journal was still on the kitchen shelf, above the window where Ray had set it in the spring of 2002. The pencil was still in the spiral binding. One of these days he would write in it himself, add another set of seeding rates and nitrogen credits and soil test readings in his own handwriting behind Earl's, and Gail would find it on the shelf some years from now, and read it twice, the way Ray had read Earl's, and take what she needed from it. Cole shifted at his boot and sighed the way dogs do when the morning's going long and the coffee is almost gone. The cover crop came up solid across both quarters that fall, the vetch and rye and crimson clover threading together in the rows the drill had cut, doing the work that no bag would need to do come spring.